if your podcast sounds super hi-fi, it sounds like radio quality, people are going to perceive it as a more of authority of information. This is Josh Giunta here. I'm the music producer for Love Science Music and the head audio engineer here at GSI Studios in New York City. And today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about audio for podcasting. So I'm making this video for people who are new to podcasting, who are creating podcasts, or people who are thinking about creating a podcast. And I've gotten a lot of questions over the past year or two from people who know that I'm an audio professional, asking me, what do I need to know about setting up, recording a podcast? Like, what are my options as far as how to record it well? And just a little about me in the podcasting world. I've recorded a lot of episodes for a number of top podcasts, including the James Altucher Show, Questlove Supreme, Gabby Bernstein's podcast, Lewis Howes' School of Greatness podcast, Malcolm Gladwell, and Rick Rubin's Broken Record podcast. So I've done a lot of recording and I've done a lot of editing of podcasts too. So here's what you need to know. So the way I look at it, you basically have three options of how to record a podcast. The first is to do it yourself. The second is to hire a mobile recording engineer, which would mean someone who comes to your house, an office, or wherever, some meeting place. That person would come to that place with their own recording gear and record you. Third option would be to go to a recording studio, book studio time, and record it in a professional recording studio like this one. So yeah, let's unpack what each of those three options would entail in detail. Let's take a dive into the DIY approach if you're going to record it yourself. And I'm sure a lot of you are going to find this appealing because maybe you're like type A personality, but there's a lot of aspects to it that you just have to take into consideration. So there's going to be a bit of a learning curve of all the elements you're going to have to learn about the recording process, but I'm going to lay that out for you right now. So essentially, you're going to have to either buy or rent or borrow a bit of recording gear to make this happen. You're going to need a computer, first and foremost, because you're going to need to run some type of audio recording software. So the industry standards for audio recording software would be Pro Tools and Logic. And Logic is going to run a little cheaper. I think you can definitely get it on the App Store. It definitely only runs for Mac computers because it's built by Apple. I think it runs either $200 or $300 for the program. Pro Tools probably starts around $600. The quality of these two programs is totally comparable, very professional. Maybe Logic is a little more intuitive, but you're still going to have to watch some videos about how to learn those programs and how to record audio into them. There's other programs out there, which I won't get into, some more professional than others, but those two, Pro Tools and Logic, are kind of the industry standards for recording audio. You're probably thinking about GarageBand, because I know it's on your computer. GarageBand, I wouldn't recommend it if you really want a professional recording, because when you really get into the deep editing, you're going to find that the program is limited in what it can do. It's designed that way because they actually want you to hit those limitations and then buy Logic, which would be like the next step. And also the way the software is built, the audio doesn't sound quite as good, simply put. So can you record into that? Yes, but is it the best option for something professional? No. So you got the software, and then the next thing you're going to need is what's called an interface. Basically a box you plug the microphones into, and then you run that box USB to your computer. So that interface is the middleman, the middle piece between your microphones and your computer. It's going to take the analog audio recorded from the microphone, put it through the box, convert it to digital audio information, which your software program can then put on your screen. I'd say the cheapest audio interface you're probably going to find is like $150 or so for something like a Scarlett 2, I think they're called. That'll definitely get the job done. It'll sound pretty good. On top of that, you're going to need a pair of microphones, assuming you have yourself as the host and one guest. Definitely going to need one microphone for each person speaking, because if you have a room microphone between a few people, it's going to sound a little bit distant and it's not going to sound like radio, close, high-def audio. My recommendation is not to go with some type of room mic. So to speak about specific microphones, the industry standard for podcasting and radio broadcast would be this here, Shure SM7. How much is a Shure SM7? These run about $400, so if you got a pair of them, it'd be $800. I'm not sure, they might be a little steep off the bat, but if you want a pro radio sound, then that would be what you could get. An alternative mic won't sound quite as good. For $100, you can get the Shure SM58. And for whatever microphone you use, you should definitely get a pop filter, which you put in between the speaker's mouth and the microphone. And what this does is it prevents your P sounds and your S sounds from being too exaggerated, because most microphones are very sensitive to these types of sounds, so this reduces that extra P and S sound. I wouldn't recommend getting like a microphone to put in between everyone, like say a room mic, because then it's going to sound a little more distant and you're going to hear more of the sound of the room. You really want like a close, tight proximity sound, so it sounds like the person is speaking directly to you. So I'd highly recommend that each speaker within the podcast has their own microphone. You're also going to need mic stands. This is a full-size mic stand. You can also get like smaller mic stands, which would be maybe this tall, sitting on top of a table. You see like Larry King always uses a little microphone on top of a table, little microphone stand. And you're also going to need cables for the microphones, which are called XLR cables, which connect the back of the microphone to the interface we talked about before. That sums up the DIY process of the actual tools you'll need to record. Then you'll actually need to know how to record correctly into the software, which is kind of a bigger conversation, which I'm not going to get into now. But if you want to drop a comment or send me an email, I'd be happy to talk to you about that if you're at that stage. If you go the DIY route, you're going to need some editing chops. So in that said software that you buy, either Logic or Pro Tools or whatever program, you're going to need to know how to take the audio of the conversation, put it in the program, and then chop it down, edit out the parts you don't want, and fade things in, fade things out, put your music in place, and cut out parts of the conversation that you don't want, and make it sound smooth and professional without any glitches in the audio. You'll also need to know a little bit about the mixing process, brighten up the things you record to make them sound a little more lifelike, and you would also want to make them more even sounding so that certain words aren't way louder than others. Like when someone laughs, you don't want it to be like insanely louder than when they're talking at a normal voice. And you're also going to want your audio to be a certain loudness, where all podcasts and radio broadcast at a certain amount of loudness. And if you're recording something, it's actually being recorded at a softer volume, so you need in the mixing process to bring those levels up so that they match the industry standard for decibel and audio levels. So as you can see, there's a lot to unpack in the DIY approach. It's recommended that in some way you involve someone who's knowledgeable about audio to either have them do some of these tasks or all these tasks. And I'll get into that now about what that could look like. So option number 2 with how to make audio for a podcast would be to hire a mobile engineer. What this person would do is basically come to your location. Say you're interviewing your guest at your guest's workplace. You could get your mobile engineer to show up at that location, say it was an office space, and they would basically bring all the gear I just mentioned. They would bring like their computer and interface, mics, cables, all the necessary stuff. They would set you guys up. You would just have the conversation. They would record it in that said location, and that would be it. They would either give you the files or they would go on and do the editing if you had them do the editing. And I should have said this earlier, it's important to record in specific types of rooms. You don't want to record in a room that's really live sounding and has basically hard surfaces. For example, a kitchen would be a terrible place to record because most kitchens, there's no carpet in the kitchen. There's, either tile floors, tile walls. Ideally, a room with like maybe even carpet on the walls would have a very dead sound, because you don't want to hear that the person is like echoing or there's any kind of reverberation in the space that they're in. You want to hear it nice and clear and dead and dry sounding. So if you record at your chosen location in an office, make sure you choose a room that doesn't have like a bunch of windows and isn't really boomy sounding. You want to have like kind of a quiet, dead room. And the third way to record a podcast professionally would be to book a recording studio. In this situation, you would basically most likely pay hourly, or maybe you would pay a flat rate, and you and the guest could show up to the studio. If it's a nice studio, it's going to be a really beautiful space to be in and to work in, and you won't have to think about any of the recording aspects if you're working with a good engineer. The price of this can vary greatly depending on how nice the studio is, how reputable it is. If you live in a big city, it's going to be more expensive than if you're in a small town or somewhere rural. I'd say the bottom studio rate you're going to find would be like maybe $30 an hour, and this could go all the way up to, for like a really nice podcast specific recording studio in a city, would probably cost, $300 an hour or somewhere in that ballpark, maybe more. So a lot of times with recording studios, as with in many other fields, you get what you pay for. I recommend doing the research and making sure you're going to a nice studio, and also working with someone who knows what they're doing, and better yet, if they know about the ins and outs of podcast recording. You could also hire people to help you with certain aspects of organizing your audio. If you don't really want to pay top dollar to book a podcast recording studio, you could hire, say, an engineer to help you choose the right gear. And, maybe you buy the gear for your home setup, and then you could have the engineer come for the first session and just get you set up, to make sure everything records correctly. They kind of do all that legwork, and then you're just kind of recording. Maybe they could teach you, and then you could kind of from there record more on your own. It kind of depends on how much you want to dive into the logistics of the podcasting and the editing. To edit, say, an hour-long conversation of a podcast, I could probably do that in 2 or 3 hours, because you have to listen to it in real time. And that's from someone who really knows what they're doing and can do things quickly. So it'll definitely take you longer if you're starting out. So that's something to keep in mind. And a couple other things to think about once you have your podcast recorded. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but once your podcast is all finished and edited and completed, in order to get that online, you're going to need to find a digital distribution service. And that would basically be a website, a middleman website, which you could upload your podcast to and your podcast artwork. And that site would essentially distribute your podcast to Spotify or iTunes or the podcasting app on people's phones or Google. But those distribution services typically don't do marketing. That's not the same as marketing. It's not like you put your podcast up on Spotify and then Spotify promotes it and tries to get people to listen to it. That's not included in distribution. That's separate. So if you want people to hear it, either do your own marketing through social media or have some type of marketing team working for you, or if you have a fan base already, you already have that built in. That's kind of like the post creation state of the whole picture and getting people to hear the creative work that you're putting out. And I'll leave you with just a quick tip. If you're going to record a podcast, you should film it too. You should get a nice camera, or at least get nice footage of the conversation with both guests, because you can put the whole thing on YouTube with the visual of the speakers, and B, you can chop it up into highlighted moments to use for social media, for Instagram, for Facebook. So those are my thoughts of all the nuts and bolts of audio in a podcast. I'm happy to answer specific questions you have. Drop me a comment or send me an email. I'll be happy to chat. Love Science Music on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.